Okay, we want to re-engage a little bit. Couple of things I want to touch on. If you are not one of our blog readers, let me tell you about that just a little bit. We do a daily blog called The 16%. It's a different author every day. We've got a team that regularly blog, and then in addition to that, we have various guest bloggers that are in local government from around the U.S. that blog. The reason we call it the 16% is from research that has been done on change management. And in simple terms, about 2.5% of people are change leaders, and about 13.5% are early adopters. And that's who we've chosen to really focus on. To be honest with you, we've fired a few clients. We've chosen not to do business with some local governments whose check would still clear, but who weren't on the same intellectual plane that we were on. If you ask anybody at SGR, we are passionate about changing the way local government does business. We do a morning circle up where we get everybody in, and it's literally a 30 seconds apiece, what's on the clock, what's everybody got going that day, try to help us stay in touch. And Greg is wonderful about almost every single day. He wraps up the circle up by saying, okay team, let's go change the world today. Because that's really where our heart is. We're really passionate about that. To that end, out on one of the tables, you may have seen a little handout. It's a self-assessment called Are You a 16% Organization? It's a little polarity scale that is just designed to help you stimulate some internal thought about whether you're really functioning at a change leader organization stage. And as we talked about earlier this morning, the simple fact is that the world is changing so fast, so rapidly, you cannot stay the same. You cannot maintain. You've got to either be constantly changing or you're going to be falling behind. There is no alternative. So that's the first thing I want to mention to you. Then I want to just share a couple little fun things about ACU. I went to ACU. I don't know where that came from. Getting old and senile. About SGR, a couple little, I commented yesterday how cool it was watching some people come in the door, see Chrissa, meet Chrissa for the first time, throw their arms around Chrissa because they had worked together for a long, long time, but had never actually met. I knew this was the case, but it had kind of one of those things that slipped through my mind. Katie Corder, who I introduced to you earlier, out in the hall went up to introduce herself to Lauren Swain, both of them who work for us. Both of them been with us a year or more, but we are such a spread out company with offices everywhere. We literally have some employees that have never met each other. So at least two of our employees today met each other for the first time, and both of them been with us for over a year. One of them a couple of years. So we're in a different world. I mean, that really just sort of reinforces it's a different kind of environment that we're in. So I wanted to share that little fun thing with you. And then I wanted to share one other thing. Chrissa is out manning the table out there so that everybody else can be in here. So she's not in here for this. But when we first launched the LMS, which we'll talk to you about later, it wasn't when we first launched it, but we're still getting our sea legs under us with it. And you remember the Moore tornado. We've got some people here from Oklahoma. Well, Chrissa lives in Norman, Oklahoma, and she was literally, Moore and Norman are adjacent to each other. She was literally about 5 or 6 miles from the heart of what hit. And she had an LMS demo scheduled that day with 3 of our current members. And they didn't know what was going on with the tornado. And literally, Chrissa goes and she gets her kids and the nanny in the closet. She operates from one of our distributed offices, a home office. She goes and gets the nanny and the kids, puts bicycle helmets on them, stacks mattresses in the closet, and then sits on the floor of the closet doing the LMS demo while the tornado is going on. So there's a level of passion there for our members that is pretty remarkable. And Krissa really sort of became part of SGR's corporate legend with what she did with that. So I wanted to share that with you. Now, if you will, grab your conference notebook and flip back about middle of the way through. It's right after the Fort Worth. It's called Cascading Competency Conversations. You'll see the page looks like this. Now, we're not going to go through it, but I'll give it to you to let you reference that. One of the challenges, we've talked a lot about culture shift. We've talked a lot about how do you shape and form culture, because you cannot separate becoming a learning organization from how you manage and shape and develop the kind of culture you want to become, which is really that intro to what Krissa did. We try to build a culture at SGR that is so intensely focused on our members, you get the sense of what somebody's willing to do to go above and beyond. Well, the reality is, for you to create that kind of culture in your organization takes a lot of work, and the larger the organization becomes, the harder it is to do that. We have our challenges with as small of a company as we are, but when you've got 250 or 500 or 6,000 employees, it becomes increasingly difficult to figure out how do you really permeate the culture. I am a passionate believer in the concept I told you about earlier this morning, that organizations become what they talk about. And I also told you earlier that one of the differences between the public and the private sector is the higher somebody rises in the organization in the public sector, the more resistant they become to being developed, because they see it as telegraphing weakness instead of telegraphing strength. And I think it's totally counterintuitive, but it is real. So we started wrestling with a few years ago, and I'm glad to see Brian here from Round Rock. We did this first with Round Rock, and what happened was there was a set of goals that the council had adopted dealing with, and I don't remember all the specifics now, Brian, but dealing with, some of it was the bench card, scorecard, balanced scorecard thing. And one of the issues was executive development. And so Round Rock called us, the HR director at that time called us and said, we're trying to figure out how to execute on this. This is we haven't done anything like this before, and we don't know exactly what the heck we need to do with this. Can you come help us figure this out? And so that was really how we began to develop what evolved into what I would call cascading competency conversations. Round Rock, we've been doing this 5 years now with the executive team, where Randy Mayu, many of you have heard Randy speak, he's going to be here tomorrow. Randy goes in and presents a business book, a leading edge business book, and it's all Randy does for a living is presents business books. Now, that sounds incredibly boring, but he's actually very, very dynamic. He's been doing it now with the Round Rock team once a month for about 5 years. And what will happen is he'll go in and over an extended lunch will present this business book. What you see in here is the handout that accompanies that presentation. And it'll always include a 2-page outline of the book, 3 pages of key quotes, and then 12 questions, 3 for each of the 4 dimensions of leadership in our 4th dimension leadership model. So there's 3 discussion questions that are relational, 3 that are operational, 3 that are systems, and 3 are strategic. And then Mike Mowry will go in and will lead the conversation, facilitate the conversation that is what I call the so what conversation. Because a lot of organizations they take the time to read business books, but to be honest with you, the typical organization reads business books by taking a chapter a month or some variation of that, because they don't want to commit the time that it really takes to invest it. Rowlett has been doing this also with their management team for 2 years, 3 years now, something to that effect. They do it a little differently. They actually do it in the evenings around a meal as a management team, kind of a little different model. So there's different models. Well, what occurred is that we started getting cities in other parts of the U.S. Richland, Washington actually was the first one that called and said, we love this concept, but we can't pay to bring a speaker up every month. Can you figure out something, figure out a way to solve the problem? And so what we did is we spent some time and we developed what we've called cascading competency conversations. And here's in very simple terms how the model is designed to work. Is that the city manager or other chief executive in an organization, the city manager we've loaded Randy's stuff, we film him and put him in the LMS. So the city manager takes and has the executive team watch a 30-minute executive book briefing that's Randy. Very dynamic, but still recording. Prints out the handout, which you've got a sample of in your book, and then the city manager leads the so what discussion using the discussion questions at the staff meeting, at their executive team meeting. Then the executive team repeats the process for their mid-level managers. So the director of public works goes back to their team, has them watch the online video, and then turn around, print out the handout, bring it to the staff meeting, and the director of public works leads a 30-minute conversation that's the so what conversation that is influenced and colored by having heard the city manager just lead the same discussion. Then the division directors that report to the director of public works go back and do the same thing with their frontline supervisors, who do the same thing with their frontline employees. So we designed this trying to figure out how do you truly do culture shift by getting a consistent message from the top of the organization to the bottom on the theory that organizations become what they talk about. So the whole system was designed to take and be able to try to get the whole organization talking about the same stuff every month. Because what it does is allows you in a very efficient fashion to be able to flow that down, get the whole organization talking very, very efficiently, and because it is leading edge business books, senior level managers tend to engage beautifully with it instead of being resistant. They tend to see it as really good stuff that's expanding their horizons instead of being, I'm sitting through training because I have to be here. One tangible example of that, we did this with Rowlett a couple of years ago. We were in the midst still of kind of the economic pain. And Rowlett called and said, we want to have Randy do something with a budget workshop. And that just happened to time with the movie Moneyball coming out. So Randy actually took the book Moneyball, turned it into an executive briefing, and the whole point, if you haven't seen the movie, the whole point of the movie Moneyball is how do you win the game even though you don't have as much resources as the other guy. So it's kind of a different kind of approach. It's very different than anything we've seen done before. And like a whole lot of what we do, we're not the ones who cooked up the idea. What we did is sit down and figure out how to meet needs that were identified by organizations, which is really part of the culture that we've got. So I want to just answer, I want to take a minute to answer any questions. That's pretty much all I'm going to share with you on cascading competency conversations, but I want to answer any questions you may have about that, because it's very definitely a different kind of approach. And what I'd like to do, I haven't told them I was going to do this, but before, in case you have any questions, I'm going to ask Brian, the city manager in Rowlett, just to share a little bit of what they've done, what they've seen, because they're following a little different model. And the other Brian, I'm going to ask to talk a little bit about what Round Rock has done, because their model is a little different. So I'll start over here with this, Brian, and if you just kind of share what Round Rock has done using book briefings with Randy.
As Ron mentioned, we've been using SGR now for, I guess, almost 5 years. And it did start as a kind of a council directive to senior executive development. About 2 years after they started, we transitioned to another city manager. He's been in place for about 3 years now. But, you know, the discussion and being able to get all the directors on a pretty routine basis to come in and have those discussions. And Randy's pretty dynamic. He draws you out into the mix on a lot of these discussions. You know, from my perspective, you know, when we did the city manager transition, this very easily could have gone away. And, you know, one of my positions was to say, let's keep this going. Because, you know, we're starting to see some positive behavior changes. So it's been good for us. I think we'll continue to do it, maybe even expand in some other areas. But it's been good.
Super. Would you just share a little bit kind of what Rowlett has done? Because it's a little different model.
You know, as city manager, I believe we have a brilliant executive team. I'm very confident in the skill sets and the knowledge base. And very rarely do we have a staff meeting where we don't have several hundred years worth of experience in the room. What Randy has done, and we've used him on a quarterly basis, we've had a very similar thing to what Round Rock has done. We also bring him into our annual executive retreat, which we do, I think it was a 2-day retreat. And the night that we stay over, generally we could bring Randy in to do the book briefing. What I like about the book briefing, and this is really true, with a lot of our guys, I don't need formal training all the time. What I need something to do is stimulate ideas, where we can have a conversation, where we can kind of continue to kick that can around and figure out how could we use that material. The very first one we did, as Ron mentioned, was the Moneyball. And I thought to myself, oh my God, here we are at this retreat. It's supposed to be stimulating conversation. We're going to have a book review. Oh, how fun is that going to be? Well, Randy is very dynamic. I really felt like energized by the conversation instead of ho-hum about it. So like I said, we've used him in numerous occasions. It is one of those things where my goal is to stimulate that conversation and do something with it. Randy doesn't always spend the time to ask all the questions in there, but we've come back after that fact, sometimes in our next staff meeting, and we have follow-up. And we'll ask those questions. What do we learn? What can we do from it? And I think that's what stimulates the learning. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Any questions about the concept? Grapevine, Bruno, the city manager, isn't here. Grapevine's taken yet a different approach. We, with them, every other month, they actually do a joint Chamber of Commerce executive team book briefing at a breakfast. And it's created some real interesting conversations across public-private lines about things like customer service and supervision and those sorts of things. So there's different models. But any questions or anything of any of these folks or me? Yeah, Brian?
We've taken advantage of this as well with our executive staff. We had a chance to take the assessment youth and figure out how each of us come down on stuff. So.
Super. If you couldn't hear him, he was talking about they've integrated the IOPT into what they're doing as well with their executive team. Any questions about cascading competency? The focus has got to be, how do you create a conversation that is ongoing and sustained about what the culture both is and you desire it to be. The thing to come back to again and again is that you become what you talk about. So if you're not stimulating conversations in your organization that are constantly reinforcing what you want to become, you're not ever going to get there. There's a quote that I love from Alice in Wonderland. The Cheshire Cat said, "If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there." And most of our organizations operate in an environment that we're going somewhere, but we don't really know where, and then we're surprised when we get there. And so what you've got to do is constantly come back, whether it's this tool or different kinds of tools. There's certainly different tools that are available, but you've got to be engaging in that conversation. If you want to shift the culture of the organization, You've got to have the organization talking about the stuff that matters. Any other questions, comments, anything? Okay, what we're going to do then is allow you to continue eating, dessert, whatever, and we will reconvene at 12:45, so you've got a little time for finish up eating and break and all of that sort of stuff. You've got about 20 minutes, a little over 20 minutes, so kind of a little bit of relaxed time till then.